Good evening, everyone. Welcome to ADVMoto Live, number 18, Suspension, Secrets, and Yamaha's new Tenere 700. In brief, suspension, we all feel it working. We know it's important. It saves both rider and bike from hard impacts and vibrations. But tuning them for dual sport riding has unique challenges that's not found in other types of riding. Stick around with us tonight as we talk about Yamaha's Tenere 700 suspension settings and other ADV fork and shock suspension basics on ADVMoto Live number 18. All right. Well, got a really cool guest on tonight. We're going to dive into the topic. The ADV revolution in the US and abroad pulls influences from all genres of riding. Talk about everything from racing to touring, and now even micro bikes, like the monkeys and everything down to 50cc. Despite the range of bikes that we have, one thing they all have in common is a need for good suspension. Good suspension is not only a performance and comfort consideration, but really largely also safety. As ADV bikes get more off-road oriented, we demand a lot more from these bikes, and our guest tonight has brought his racing passion and expertise into everyday bikes like the Honda CB500X and BMW's 310GS. Everyone, please welcome Rally Raid founder John Mitchinson. Hey John, you there?
Hi Carl, how are you?
Pretty good. How are you doing tonight?
Yeah, very good. It's 1 in the morning here, so we're okay. Plenty of
Yeah,
time.
it's. What are you? You guys are 5 hours, 5 hours ahead.
Yeah, so, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thanks for taking the time out. I know you guys are always busy. You just got back from the a Qatar rally, right?
Yeah, last week. So we were supplying 20 kits to the Qatari Motor Federation to fit for the bikes at the last minute. They just decided to run a bike class in the rally. They normally just run cars and buggies and side to side.
Wow, that's crazy. 20 kits, huh?
Yeah, so we had to go over and spend 2 days fitting them. Um, and then we just stayed on and watched the rally and then just came back on Sunday.
Awesome, awesome. That's great. Um, your voice is a little bit low. I would just kind of ask you to speak up if it's possible. That way, it's easier for folks to hear you.
Yeah, I can speak up. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So, some people are already familiar with you. You've been around for a long time, but could you please just give a brief introduction on who you are and how you started Rally Raid products?
Well, we're here in the UK, so I've always ridden in the UK. Started riding trials when I was about 12 or 13. And then once I got a job and could afford it, I started doing, well, it was scrambling then, but then it's called motocross now. And still did the trials and then got a bit older and got into the enduros and then just progressed into rallying. There wasn't really anything about specific that I wanted for the first. I had a 525 KTM, so I made my own sort of rally kit for that. And then when the 690 came out in 2008, again, same thing. There wasn't really that much out there, so we just decided we'd make our own rally kit. So I just raced the bike for a year or two, and then we had a lot of interest from ADV guys saying, that's really what we want is more fuel capacity, a fairing, and so it was quite a straightforward move to convert the 690 rally kit into a 690 adventure kit, and that's really how the business started. But I've always done engineering, had our own engineering business, so it was a sort of natural use of the machinery and the talents we have for doing engineering work to sort of take a sideways move and do the motorcycle adventure part.
Wow, that's great. So how long has Rally Raid been around as an official business?
In official business, 12 years now.
Right on, right on, right on. So you've seen fundamentally, in Europe, you guys always had these ADV bikes like the Africa Twins and stuff like that. We didn't have them here at all, right? So we had some of the long in the tooth models like the DR650, the KLR 650, and all that other kinds of stuff. So your scene was obviously much different from ours, I mean, but now that it's more popular in the US, do you see a lot of sort of activity coming from the United States?
Oh, definitely. I mean, over 50% of our business exports outside the EU, and it's sort of 50-50 between the US, Canada, and Australia. So, yeah, it's a big market for us. It started off with the 690 KTM, and then it sort of naturally progressed. We took on the CB 500, and that's really popular in America. And then we sort of went a little bit different and looked at the new G310 GS a few years ago and did a similar thing to that we did for the CB to make better suspension, heavy duty spoke wheels, and again that's taken off. I think um, there's a definite growth in the smaller, lighter adventure bikes. A lot of it is because the demographic of the rider is getting older. You go to an adventure meeting now and you see that the guys are getting older. And a lot of people are thinking, well, if I'm going to carry on riding, I've got to downsize, and that doesn't mean you have less fun. In fact, a lot of people have bought the 310 or bought the CB, and then they contact us to say, they're actually going on trails um, on their own that they would never have gone up on a bigger bike because you've got the confidence that if you do drop it, you can pick it up, and if you do drop it, it's not really going to cost the earth to repair it.
Yeah.
A lot of people, it's just getting over the psychological thing that they're downsizing. But I just think, as long as you're still riding, who cares? What size the bike is. The main thing is you're having fun, and you're still enjoying the riding. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So, you know, what what made you want to go from making mostly rally kind of racing competition components to making serious upgrade parts for bikes like the 500X and the 390 and now
Um,
the 700?
yeah. Well, the rally. That's how the business started, developing the rally parts. But obviously, with the rally sort of scene, there is a limited amount of customers. It's a very niche sport, and it's not a cheap sport, so there is a limit to how many kits you could actually sell. Uh,
Mm.
Once we had people contacting us about, could they use the rally kit but convert it to an adventure kit? We did that. Made an adventure version of it, and then all of a sudden we realised the market is exponentially much bigger. So
Mm.
that meant that we could, if you're selling more kits, you have more time and more money to invest in developing. With the rally bikes, because it is such a niche market, the kits tend to be more expensive because you just can't recoup the development cost very quickly. But the adventure market is that much bigger, so we do have the time then and the money to spend on looking at developing suspension, developing aftermarket, because
Awesome.
you can recoup the cost because the volume's there. It's worth doing.
Yeah, well, I mean, especially in the US. I think Europe it's probably less of a problem, but it's such a small market in the United States that achieving, you know, real high scale manufacturing and bringing those costs down is sort of a challenge. I mean, if it was consumer electronics or baseball hats or something,
Yeah.
I mean, you could, I mean, you bring those costs down real fast. But but especially with the type of work that you do. So, all right, on to the topic of the night. So, for someone that's completely new to this, all right, uh, what is your bike suspension and why is it important?
Right, well, the first thing is you've got to think with suspension, it's the contact between the solid part of the bike, the frame, the engine, and the idea is it's contact between the bike and the ground via your wheels. So that's the basic description of suspension. The next thing is you've got two parts of the suspension. You've got the spring, which is the part of the suspension that hopefully keeps the wheels in contact with the undulations as you're travelling across the ground. And then you've got the damping, both rebound and compression, that restricts the speed of the spring compressing. So they're the sort of two basic factors. And in an ideal world, you want the wheels to be in contact with the ground at all times, unless you're jumping. And that's the sort of $1,000,000 question: is how do you cover such a range of bikes, of, of the weight of the bike, the weight of passengers, hard luggage, soft luggage, different terrain. It's a real Pandora's box, is to create suspension that will cover that range. And however you do it, suspension tends to be a compromise eventually, because every rider has their own different requirements.
Yeah, so that makes it almost impossible just to kind of send out a universal product, right?
Yeah, we all our shocks and torque kits, when the customer orders them, they sort of fill in the little tick box of rider weight, type of riding style, whether they're going to have passenger and extra luggage. And from that, you can get a pretty good idea of what spring rate they would need, and then we build them to order. So the shock bodies are there ready, but we don't fit them with the spring. Or some customers don't want a hydraulic preload adjuster, that if they're never going to take a passenger and they're always going to have a consistent rider weight, then there's really no benefit in spending the extra $400 or $500 fitting a hydraulic preload adjuster. The whole point of a hydraulic preload adjuster is ease of convenience of adjusting preload. So we can tailor them to suit individual riders, because like I said, everybody's different. It's very rare that you find two people that want the same thing out of the bike.
Oh, I'm sure. So here's just like kind of like it's a little one-off question, which is, um, if you're talking about preload adjustment, when do you change that, and when do you leave it alone?
Well, the first thing is to set your preload whenever you fit a new spring or you get a new bike, is set the sag. And really, to set that, you just want solo rider with your riding gear, very little fuel in the fuel tank, no luggage, nothing. So you're really looking at the minimum weight of the bike. You'd set your sag, and then anything else that you add to the bike is plus weight. So whether that's more gas in the tank, it's extra luggage, it's a passenger, it's always plus. If, like I said before, if a lot of people, if they're riding adventure bikes and they're riding solo, they're probably pretty consistent on rider weight. So once you've set your sag, a lot of them would never adjust it. But if you're the type of person that probably rides the bike in the week to work, or trail ride a little bit at the weekend, and then you might go on holiday or touring with a passenger or a lot of luggage, then you really do want to adjust your sag before you go away with the extra weight, because that's the whole point. With the Tenere, it has got hydraulic preload adjustment that Yamaha have fitted as standard. So if it's there, use it. It's a
Yeah.
lot. It's a much better way of adjusting sag than having to use the mechanical idea of having a lock nut and getting a C spanner in there, and that's a real fact. So to have just a knob that you can turn and give you 10 mil of adjustment, and pretty roughly 10 mil of adjustment gives you around about 70 kilos of capacity to add to the bike and still keep the sag at the optimum.
Awesome. So now, we hear a lot about sag and setting sag. I mean, what happens when your sag is off? and how can someone set it themselves?
Well, most bikes from new tend to be undersprung at the rear, and Tenere isn't an exception. It's sort of sprung to somewhere around about 150, 155 pounds. So anybody that's heavier than that is going to notice that the bike squats when you sit on the bike. And as well as the only advantage of that, it makes it easy to get on and off the bike. But the disadvantage is as soon as you're riding, it actually takes weight off the fork, so you've got less weight on the front wheel, which can make the bars shake and it can make it want to push out in corners. But the main thing is, when you ride the bike, you'll notice it just blows through the stroke on the rear shock very quickly. So if you're off road, it really does. You do lose a lot of ground clearance straight away, and then anything you ride over, any rough terrain, you're just going to go through the shock stroke very quickly. So the thing you want to do is get the sag right, so the shock is up in the stroke. So you've got as much suspension movement in reserve as possible, and you've also got as much spring capacity in reserve. So later on, if you do want to add luggage or a passenger, you've got that in the bag.
Awesome. So we have a question
Yeah.
from a viewer here, which is how important is it to adjust your clickers? I guess that would be your rebound and dampening when you increase preload, or I guess alternatively decrease preload, say for luggage.
So the first thing to do on any bike is set the sag, because that's your base setting. So once you know your sag right, both static and rider sag, because they're linked, then you can ride the bike and you can adjust your clickers. You've got on the Tenere, you've got compression and rebound adjustment on the rear, and you've got compression and rebound on the front. With the rear, you really want to set it so you've got as much movement as you can without the bike, without the rebound coming back too fast. But like you were just asking, if you add more preload, generally you have to slow the rebound down, because if you add more preload, that's going to make the spring recoil faster. So you tend to want to, if you're going to put more preload on for a passenger, then you just probably add a couple of clicks of rebound as well to compensate for the extra preload that you have.
Okay, so you do have to kind of adjust them both at the
Yeah.
same time to a certain extent. And is it equally important to do it all the time, even with small adjustments, or is it just if you make big adjustments, like one day you're solo riding and the next day you've got the kitchen sink on the back?
No, the sag is the most important, but you'll probably find if you're riding solo and you get a good setup solo, then if you do go away on holiday or on a trip and you put the luggage on, or a passenger, you'll have to crank up the preload, and then generally, like I say, you'd probably put 2 or 3 clicks of extra rebound damping on, and just to slow things up a bit, because otherwise, with the extra weight on, it's going to compress the spring more and faster, but then also it will fire the spring back as well. So you just want to sort of slow things up a little bit.
Awesome, awesome. And then we have a statement here that says, so we've got a guy, Kevin Zucht, who's doing a full suspension on his Ultimate T7 build, mainly off-road, but panniers and dry bags for long rides.
Mm-hmm.
He says he would need to do a full rebuild front and back. Is that what you would suggest?
If you really want, yeah, the ultimate off-road, so you're getting the full benefit, then yeah, because the standard shock's not too bad. We dynoed it from new, and the KYB shocks, it's got fairly good damping. It's a little bit light on the rebound, but it's not too bad. It's the springing on the shock that's sort of very low. But the forks, if you do correct the shock spring by putting a stiffer spring on, it tends to put more bias onto the fork. So that's when you notice the forks performance even worse. So yeah, if you want maximum performance off road, then really that's the best way to do it, is to put a new cartridge kit and a new shock. It depends how far you want to go into it, and obviously how much money.
Yeah, for sure. So, this is one of these things again. We talked about. So, what's the difference? Like if you're just riding a street bike, you've got street standards for what's a good suspension. If you're riding a motocross bike or a trail bike, you have different standards for that. But for dual sport, and the guys from Yamaha came on here several shows ago, and they said making good suspension for a dual sport bike is crazy difficult. And it almost sounds like if you consider what a consumer is asking, out of the system, it almost seems like it's kind of impossible without it being electronic or something like that. You know what I mean? So what's the challenge there in trying to get I'm gonna say analog, but a non-electronic automatic sensing adjusting,
Yeah,
good suspension?
yeah. The thing is with the road bikes, you can work in quite a small window, and the same with motocross because they're all off road. You're at this end, whereas an ADV bike, you're trying to stretch that window to go into the off road area, but also for the street bike. So you've really got to have a shock that's got a good capacity to resist bottoming, but still have a good suppleness for the smaller bumps and sort of manholes, potholes, white lines on the road.
Mm.
That's really where you need as big a piston as possible so that you can flow oil at really low speed consistently, but also not bottom out when you have the big hits. So it is, yeah. If you can if you can get something to work on an adventure bike, you're doing well because it's probably one of the harder um, bikes to set up because of what you're asking. You want it to be good on the road, but also good off road. So it is a big window that you're working in to try and get all of that to function correctly.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty tremendous deal too, especially because you know
Yeah,
some people are actually quite aggressive on these large bikes off road.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's not just their riding. You've got such a range of weight. You can have somebody from say 150 pounds riding solo, and then you can get another rider that's probably a 210, 220 pounds riding solo, and then you can go to the complete other end where you've got a 210-pound rider with a 180-pound passenger and luggage and a top box. So the percentage that you're adding to the bike weight-wise can go from, probably 30, you're probably looking at a 35% minimum up to nearly 100%. You're nearly doubling the weight of the bike if you've got a rider, passenger, and luggage. So
Yeah,
it's a massive range to try and compensate for with springs and damping.
yeah. So here's a question: what do these kind of like electronic systems do? I know there's some variation
Yeah,
in how they act, but I was at the junket for the Tiger 1200 a couple years ago, and it's got the sensors on
that's
the rear swing arm and the fork.
yeah,
And man, I mean, that thing just really did a wonderful job. I personally kind of, tend to be more old school about stuff. You know what I mean? Like I want to keep sensors and electronics off my bike for the most part. And that's one other thing I love about the T7. It's just got the basic stuff you need.
just
There's not going to be a warning for low tire pressure or anything pop up and, like all that kinds of stuff. But what do these electronic systems do?
well, you've got two types. You've got an open loop or a closed loop. So you can have electronic in the sense that if you want to adjust your preload, like on a GS BMW, you've got a switch on handlebar that's probably got one helmet, two helmets, so you can adjust your preload electrically. So it's the same preload adjuster that's on the Yamaha, the T7. It's a hydraulic one, but instead of having a knob like you have to adjust, you'd have a small electric pump under the seat. But that's just adjusting your preload. If you For damping, like I said, you can have an open or a closed loop, so you can have a very basic electronic system, which most of the bikes have, where you can adjust the damping again from the handlebar. So if you want road, off-road or enduro, it will adjust the damping by turning a small screw inside the shock to move the range of the damping to, to either softer or harder, whether you want off-road or road. And then if you really want to go the whole hog, which is very few bikes have got that, is you would have a closed loop system where the bike is, you adjust it, but it's also monitored. You've got feedback, so you're completing the circle, and that really is limited to just a few bikes. It's mainly road bikes. It's very difficult to do with an adventure bike because the problem with an adventure bike is the length of stroke of the shock. Generally, that's the problem. We've looked at it with tractors actually, with the Tenere, because they already have electronic shock development for other manufacturers, but they tend to be street bikes. And to put it into the Tenere, we were talking about, and looking at development for the future. And to do an electronic preload adjuster is relatively simple because we've already got the preload adjuster in there. But to start putting electronic damping in, it's the difficult point is the stroke of the shock and fitting all the equipment in there, because anything you put in eats into the stroke. Whereas with a road bike, the shock tends to be similar length but much less stroke, so you've got more room to fit extra mechanical and electronic parts in there.
Well, awesome. So if someone, and we'll just kind of wrap up this general section, and then we'll move on to stuff that's more particular about the Tenere 700. But if someone is looking at a stock suspension, and that's all they've ever ridden in their life, what would you say is probably the most cost-effective upgrade for them to do? That's not going full blown into whole new shock body, new pistons, new valving. Now it has compression as well because you pay premium for that.
Yeah, the sort of best value for money is to get the sag right, and you can do that for sort of $120, about £80, with a brand new spring and for the shock, and that will make a big difference, because as well as getting the sag right on the rear, it'll transfer more weight then to the front of the bike, and you'll find even with the standard forks, it'll help the tyre to grip, and it will make the fork action a bit better because it does transfer more weight to the front, so you've got a bit more bias there. But yeah, definitely, for less than $150, just get the right spring for your weight, And the other thing is run the right tyre pressures. The amount of bikes I get on when we go trail riding, I'll swap from bike to bike, and you get on a bike and it's just, it feels harsh and it's got very little grip out of the corner, and the front's very loose going into the corners, and then when you stop, it's probably running 35 psi still in the tyres. So people forget that your tyres off-road, that is another element of your suspension, and it's a big part as well as, if you air down the sort of, it's 15, 16 psi in the rear and probably 20 in the front, you'd be amazed at the extra, not just the grip that you get from the tyre, but the actual feel of the bike. It just feels less harsh.
Well, that's one of those things that I've heard different opinions on. Like there are some folks that are out there advocating the idea that set your tires at around 25, 30 and forget about it. So the question is when do you actually need to air down?
We tend to do, because the riding we do over here in the UK is very muddy. 6 months of the year it's really muddy and loose stones, so grip is an option. So we air down a lot. We'll often ride on the road somewhere, let the tyre pressures down, ride off road, and then as soon as you get to a garage or we carry a pump, just pump them back up for the hour or two back on the road. But it's not quite so critical if it's where grips not so important. You know, if it's in deep sand, you can get away with it. But if you look on the video there that you're running, that's the sort of typical riding that we do for 6 months of the year here. It's quite muddy, clay, greasy ground. So if you don't air down the tyres, it just makes life a lot harder for you.
Understandable. All right, so on to the T7, which is a hot bike. It's a hot topic.
Yeah.
You guys have had that for, I think, almost a year longer than we've had it in the United States, right?
Yeah.
You've had a longer time to play with it. You know, in a nutshell, what are your thoughts about the limitations of the stock suspension?
I think the first thing you've got to look at is the price that it is at. You know, that the bike is not an expensive bike. You're getting a lot of bike for your money. And I think for Yamaha to build a bike for that price, you know, they've looked at it and they've not cut any corners. It's a good engine, the wheels, the quality of the finish is good. And the easiest way to save money, Carl, is suspension because a lot of it's hidden. So, you know, if you've got gold fork tubes and a nice looking shock, for a lot of people that looks the part. It's only when you come to ride it then and you realise, you know, the shock, the bike is understrung and the forks are under damp. So, but you wouldn't know that in the showroom. It's until you get it out there and start riding it that you notice that. But the rest of the bike is great. You know, we've had ours now for 18 months and it's spent, I'd say, most of its life off road as a test fuel. And we really have, you know, given it some stick and it just gets better and better. You know, the engines, I really enjoy it. You can just hook third and fourth gear everywhere on the trails and it pulls. You can run it down to next to nothing. There's no snatchiness. You know, the clutch is light, the gears are light. Apart from the rear brake, but we've sort of made it a bit grabbier just by going to a softer pad compound. But that's it really. I mean, Yamaha, they haven't skimped on anything else. It really is just suspension.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. So, you know, we've been really impressed with it over here to ourselves, and we're gonna look into some upgrades on that. We'll
Hmm.
try to see if we can work something out with you on that. You know, but the main thing though is, you know, what would you suggest someone go at first in terms of like stages? You say, okay, well, let's say, you know, I'm not gonna go full blown. I'm not 220 pounds like I am, and then carrying luggage or another rider, something like that. You know, I just don't want it to be as soft or bottom out as easily as it does stock. What would you suggest?
Well, the first thing is, you know, get the shock spring chain for one that suits your weight and the sort of riding you're doing. So, you know, like I said, we do a chart where you can go down there, look at your rider weight, whether you're going to carry a passenger, whether you're going to carry luggage. And from that, based on the experience and measurements, we've got a pretty good handle on that now. And we can supply the right spring to give you the correct sag and still retain most of the preload adjustment. So, you know, what ideally what you want is when you've just got the rider with no fuel in the bike, virtually as light as you can be, you've got the correct spring and you've still got most of your 10mm preload adjustment not used. So that then if you do put a passenger, put extra fuel in the bike, put luggage on, you've then got the adjustment on the preload adjuster to compensate for that extra weight that you're adding. So that's the rear. And then the front, that really is not as easy because we found it was very difficult to try and do anything with the OEM fork cartridge. We tried a range of different fork springs and we've got our own preload adjustable caps, which is a big help if you just want to keep the standard forks with the standard springs. We've got screw-on replacement fork caps, and what that does, it's similar to the shock. It means you can adjust your preload without having to take the forks apart. You just have a turn of a nut on top of the fork, and that's a quick fix. It's easy to fit, and it gives you the opportunity to adjust your sag without having to sort of mechanically take the forks apart. But if you then want to go to the next step, the thing we've spent the last year developing is a new open cartridge kit T7, because we just found the limitation of the OEM port with the 20mm piston that's in the cartridge. So we've taken the 35mm piston cartridge kit that we've developed for the Africa Twin, and we've just managed to fit it in the T7, and that open cartridge, it's got nearly 3 times the surface area the piston has compared to the OEM.
3 times?
Yeah, 300% bigger. So
wow.
So it means the shims that you fit in, as well as being much bigger, they're much more supple. So you get a much gentler brake when the piston is moving, and it gives us the opportunity then to shim the piston, so you can have the nice suppleness for the small little bumps and the imperfections on the tarmac, but then we can also have we've got a much better PDS, which is the final anti-bottoming. So we've got our own design of PDS for the big 35mm cartridge, where we've got a check valve in there, so we can have the lightness to cover for the small bumps without worrying that it's going to blow straight through the stroke and bottom out, which is something we just really couldn't get with the standard cartridge. We were just sort of chasing the tail eventually. So that's the sort of middle option. And then if you want to go the full sort of race off-road option, you do the same 35mm cartridge but as a closed cartridge, which has a gas bladder in the bottom. It's obviously a higher spec than the open cartridge, but it's more money. So you've sort of got your 3 options there. You've got the standard fork with preload adjustable cap. You've got the open cartridge, and then you've got the closed cartridge. And then we've sold a couple of sets to people that are either very tall people or mainly people that are going to ride the bike quite hard off-road. They've gone for this plus 30mm travel suspension, so that gives 230mm travel, front and rear.
Wow. That must make it quite tall, though.
That's the only problem, yeah. You've got to be sort of quite tall to do that, because obviously for every inch you add to your travel, you're adding an inch up on your seat height every time. So unless you want to start cutting the seat away, that's what I say to people: before you buy the taller suspension, the best thing to do is get a couple of bits of 2-inch thick timber, lay them on the floor, and put the bike on the timber, and then try and get on the bike, because that's the sort of difference it's going to be,
2 inches.
Yeah, 30 mils, so sorry, 1.5 inches. I got my metric mixed up, Carl. Yeah.
Well, that's still close enough. I think you would kind of get the idea on that, like in terms of how well that would work for you.
But
yeah, that's
1.5 inches, sort of 30 mil was a good compromise between having some more suspension travel but not raising the seat height so far that it made it difficult for riders to get on and off. And the other thing was there's plenty of overlap in the forks, because some of the bikes you have to be careful about adding travel to the front fork, because there's not enough overlap between the inner and the outer fork tube. So you've got a risk of your bushings getting onto the limit of overlap. But on the T7, on the Tenere, there's a massive amount of overlap, so there's no problem. We could make a 280mm travel if we wanted to, but when we tried it, it was just way too tall. So that's how we ended up at 230mm.
Yeah, well, that's a fair amount of difference there for sure. So here's a question then, and that is, what are the cost range? You know what I mean? So if someone just wants to go in with a basic upgrade, and you have a medium, and then you have the full on race blown style upgrade, what's someone looking at?
Well, if you just want the shock spring, like I said, that's about $120. If you want to go for the adventure shock, which is a direct replacement, it's the same travel as the OEM shock, but what you've got is a much higher quality body. It's got the same 10mm hydraulic preload adjuster, but with a bigger piston, and it's got high and low speed compression damping. Um, so that's around about $1,400, and that would come with the correct spring tailored for the rider weight. Um, the rally shock is actually no more expensive. It's just the extra length of the stroke, which, when you're building them, it's neither here nor there. So that's the same. And then the fork kits, you've got your preload adjustable fork caps, which come out at about $400. And then you go to the full kit, which is the open. You've got the choice of the open cartridge kit, which is around about $1,000. And then I think the closed cartridge, and that's in whether it's in adventure, the standard length 200mm or the 230mm rally, that's coming out at about $1,400.
Wow. Okay. And how about installing these?
Uh, the shock spring is pretty easy to install. Yamaha have made it. That's another good thing about the T7. It's the big plus for me is it hasn't got loads of bodywork hiding everything. The engine's accessible, and it's the same with the shock. It's literally 10 minutes to take the shock out, swap the spring over. If you've got a decent spring compressor or a local suspension guy, they'll do it. In the UK, we do a ride-in, ride-out service for people. But if you've got a local suspension person, they'll have the tools to do it. If it's just if you're changing the shock completely, that's even easier because that is just take the OEM shock out and put the new one in. The only thing we've found is every bike we've done so far, it's best to grease the linkages because from the factory they're very light on grease. So while you've got the shock out, it's well worth taking the dog bone and the linkage out at the rising rate and putting some good quality grease in
Mm, awesome. Now, uh, something that you know Jenny Morgan and I have in common is we are freaks about 19 and 17 wheel sets.
there. Yeah.
I know a lot of the off-road purists out there cringe at the idea of putting a 1917 wheel set on a bike like this. But I've got to say, I saw a picture of someone that had supermoto wheels on a T7, and it looked like a lot of trouble with the law. I mean, it looked like it would just be too much fun for one person to have. But do you guys have any, and if there's anyone I think in the industry, anywhere in the world, that would do something wacky like make a 1917 kit
Yeah.
for the T7, I think it would be you guys.
Well,
What are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on that?
well, we did it with the Africa Twin, and it's now our best-selling set of wheels. We sell probably 2 to 1 Lowe's Supermoto wheels, 1917 for the Africa Twin, and we do replacement tubeless wheels. So that shows, well, it shows two things. One, that a lot of people aren't riding the bikes off road. They want the adventure style, the high bars and the comfortable riding. But actually, when you put a 19 front and a 17 rear on, it really turns it into a hooligan bike on the road. You can really throw it around, and there's nothing better when we used to have the Africa Twin. Then you could go out with your adventure riding gear, and you'd be on, especially on the back roads, you'd be tucked up behind someone on a sports bike, and they'd be doing a double. You'd be, really looking under their elbow, thinking there's a guy behind me on an Africa Twin. But what they didn't realise you've got some really good road tyres on there. And the thing is with an adventure bike, they tend to be lighter and more flippable. So
Mm.
I wouldn't say it's out of the question. It's just at the moment we're really snowed under with the existing new products we've got. But it's probably next summer, if I fancy doing it on my bike, I'll definitely try it. You know.
Yeah, well, certainly if you do, and you want someone to test or get the word out,
It,
uh,
it was the Africa Twin with the 19-inch front and the 17 rear was an absolute scream. You know,
yeah,
it was just so much fun. You could be on the back roads and you'd come out of the hairpin and just flick the clutch in second gear and you'd be up on the back wheel and you know,
man,
and you could really use the brakes to the maximum because that's the only problem with having a 21-inch front wheel and a skinny 21-inch trail tire. The brakes are way better than the grip that you've got, you know. And it's, so we found that with the Africa Twin, that once you went to a 19-inch front with a much wider tire, you could the braking distances just demolished, you know, because you've got so much front end grip then.
yeah, yeah. I can't wait to see if you guys do that. And then I was also talking with Jenny and said, well, one of the problems with the T7 is it's got the cast side stand, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
So we've done 1917 conversions to a 2008 Versus, which I loved. We did a 1917 to a KLX 250 SM,
Oh yeah, yeah,
which ended up being marvelous. And then we did a 1917 conversion to a KTM 690 Enduro. And
yeah.
I loved every single one of them. I mean, all those just had steel side stands, right? So we got a buddy here, Mitch Piper. He's from New Zealand. He does a lot of the fab work for cars, race cars, roll cages, and you know he helps us out a little bit. He chops it and then welds the foot back on. But I gotta be honest with you, it's not that I really need the extra seat height or anything, but I just love it.
Mm.
You know, I love the balance between the on-road handling and the fact that you can still get a little bit messed up on gravel roads and you know and things like
Yeah.
that. I mean, you know, you start to get limitations when you start to go into things that are more narrow or more technical, or you start hitting you know larger bumps and stuff like that. But it's a bit it's the balance, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that outrageous because when you know people say, you know, why put a 19-inch front and a 17 rear? Like when we did the Africa Twin, I said, well, hang on, BMW have been doing that for years. All their GSs run 19-inch front and 17 rear. So, oh yeah, yeah. I think it's just because it's a 2118 combination and it's a sort of slimmer bike that people think it's a bit strange. But actually, when you've ridden the bike, it really is fun to ride, you know. Yeah, so it's probably something we may do down the line, but at the moment we're pretty tied up with it with existing because the Tenere is just going out the shops like no tomorrow. You know, there's a wait. Most dealers have got a waiting list, and because the bike is so undersprung at the rear, you know, we're really you know trying to keep up with the suspension and some of the other products that are going out quite regularly.
Yeah, that's awesome. You know, a lot of people during this COVID thing started finding that they had supply problems.
Mm.
Did you guys find that at all?
Not too bad because we machine all the parts we do, we machine in house. So we don't really rely on outside suppliers. The suspension is all from Tractive Suspension in Holland, um, so that's fairly close to us. And we also do machining for them, so it's a bit of a reciprocal thing. So, but yeah, because we do all our development in house, we do all our own CNC machining, our own injection molding. We've got our own fabrication shop where we can do all the engine guards, luggage racks. So we're fairly independent that way, which is really saved us. We've kept busy right through any of the lockdowns, and you know we've got a few more things development on the back burner for the T7, but at the moment we're just pretty busy trying to keep up with the demand because you know you talk to all the dealers and they're all trying to get more T7s in stock because they're just they're priced right and it's a good bike, you know. And I think the word's out there now and people, you know, they're looking to get hold of them.
Oh yeah, for sure. You know, ours come from Japan in
Yeah,
the U.S. Yours comes from France or
they're made by MBK in France. Yeah,
Yeah.
It's the same spec as far as I can see
Oh
on,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah, they're just Yamaha have made a lot of their bikes in France and Italy. The old Teneres used to be made there.
Mm.
It's a historical thing, and I think a lot of it was from the sort of Dakar days because obviously the French Gaulois and the riders like Peter Hansel and that they rode the big Yamaha Teneres and they tended to be developed by the French Yamaha.
Ah, okay.
So that's sort of where it came from, really.
Oh,
There's, there's,
yeah.
there's quite a lot of history with the Tenere in France. They're very, very popular.
Wow. So how is the supply of bikes over there? I know it's very, very thin over here.
It's very much the same here. I mean, second-hand prices have gone up, and getting hold of new bikes is really difficult at the moment. We've got a customer looking to set up an adventure touring business over in Kazakhstan. They're looking for six CB500s, and to get six brand new bikes at the moment of one make is pretty difficult.
Mm.
Same with the Tenere, there's a waiting list everywhere, and if anybody's got one that's 6 months old, you can get good money for them. So that's just the supply thing because a lot of the bikes, um, the supply chain broke down from the Far East, so it's now starting to have a knock-on effect.
Yeah, right on, right on. Well, thanks, John. There's been a whole ton of information you've kind of shared with us here. Go lead into our last question, which is our canned question.
Mhm.
Do you have any words of inspiration or advice for future adventure riders?
Uh, Keep riding. I just think if if you want to do something, and if the trail's too gnarly, or just have a think about it, and think, well, are you on too big a bike, or maybe the tyres are too, not quite what you're doing. Generally, the bikes, whatever bike you're on, will get them. It's just a matter of working out what's stopping you getting there. And I find most of the people that I know are getting older that still want to keep on riding. We're all downsizing, and the thing is now there's such a good range of middleweight and lightweight bikes for adventure riding, and the value for money is fantastic these days. And they're not, it's not like the old days where you'd have to go out. We used to go out and you'd take spare plugs and points and foils and things if you went away for a week's riding. The bikes now are just so reliable. I mean, we've got a CB500 in the shop now with customers, and that's just come back from around the world trip with 90,000 miles on it, and nothing's gone. The engine is untouched. And that's not the first one. We've had three or four now like this that have done nearly 100,000 miles. And the main, you'd say what happened, and they've probably had an indicator bulb go.
Yeah,
But apart from chain and sprockets and things like that, which are just, they're consumables, the bikes these days are fantastic. For me, there's never been a better time for middleweight size bikes. If you want, and I ride solo a lot, same as Jenny does. We meet a lot of people riding solo when we're out, and we also prep a lot of bikes for people that are riding solo. And if you're riding solo, the first rule is you've got to be able to pick your own bike up. And all of a sudden, then you realise that that excludes a lot of the big bikes where the marketing people are trying to get people to ride the big bikes. The reality is most of the people that are riding on long trips solo are generally on 500c bikes, 600s or smaller. That you don't see many people solo riding 1,000cc plus bikes.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Or at
yeah,
least not if they have to do a variety of terrain.
yeah.
I mean, if you're street touring, that's
Oh,
something else.
yeah, yeah. But if you want to ride solo and do a few trails, and especially trails in somewhere where you've never been, so you don't know what's around the corner, and if you get around the corner, and it goes steeply downhill or steeply uphill, and you're not that confident you can do it. A smaller bike, you can just get off, put it on your hip, drop the clutch and spin it round and go back where you've come from. Whereas a bigger bike, it's a much harder operation, you know. And they are relatively so cheap now compared to the big ones. I mean, the T7 is really good value, and then you look at the smaller bikes that they're even cheaper. It's a really inexpensive way to travel. When you've got bikes that are doing 70, 80 miles to the gallon,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
you're spending more on coffee and lunch than you are on fuel for the day.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, let's hope we see something like a Tenere 450 that is available for consumers. I would be 100% about that, or a 500 or something, a parallel twin.
I
I
think,
would I would just love that. I would just love that.
yeah, I think the manufacturers have finally sort of dawning on them that you know that there is a market there. Like I said, that the demographic is that most of the riders are getting older, so that even the manufacturers are realising that you know that a smaller bike is more attractive to them. You
Well, that's also important for new riders and younger riders, and I mean, you just want that full spectrum. I mean,
know,
I tend to favor smaller bikes, but the fact is you want that range. You want a range where someone can come into something, afford it, and then if they want to go bigger, they can go bigger. If they want to stay the same, they can go the same. If they want a different type of bike, they can go to a different type of bike.
yeah,
You know,
we find the sort of mid-size like the CB and the 310 and even the Tenere. You've got a mix of riders. You've got half the riders that are coming down from a big bike to a smaller, lighter bike, and then you've got and they tend to be the older riders, and then you've got the younger riders that are coming up from a smaller bike into the middleweight bike. So you're sort of meeting a lot of people in the middle, you know. Um,
yeah.
and there's such good value now, Carl. There's some really good bikes out there for not a lot of money, you know.
Yeah, totally. Well, all right, John, man, thanks for coming out. Please hang around for a few minutes.
Yeah,
After the show, we will just kind of debrief. But thanks again, and
thank you.
let's go close out. We'll speak more in a second.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks again to John for coming on our show tonight, especially considering uh, the time difference. It's very late there for anyone over in the UK. Having traveled some very desolate parts of the world on very inexpensive bikes myself, I could personally attest to how important suspension is for your overall safety and enjoyment. Many riders tend to ignore this upgrade in favor of other add-ons like luggage, windscreen, things like that. But even though it's more work and often more cost to set up a bike's suspension to your needs, weight, and riding style, it is 100% worth it. There's absolutely no doubt about it. If you've only ridden with stock suspension, getting a proper setup is one of the biggest improvements you can make to your bike. And often the difference is so dramatic that some people hardly believe it. Sometimes you won't even think it's the same machine anymore. But please visit rallyraidproducts.co.uk for some of the best upgrades to your Rally ADV or dual sport bike. They've got a whole host of individual upgrades for a bunch of bikes. Some I guess most of them are made in-house, and you simply cannot find them anywhere else. There's a lot of real innovation there, and you can tell that John and everyone over there really care not only about the machines, but the riders, and giving the riders what they need to enjoy their experience and their bike. But up next, please join us in 1 week for the next installment of ADVMoto Pod with host Nathan Slabaugh. And then again on November 19th for ADVMoto Live number 19, Making Movies with John Putch and Rich Montgomery. John and Rich have backgrounds in acting, directing, and production in some major TV shows, some of which I'm sure you've seen, as well as movies. They've also released a short series of hilarious Mid-Atlantic BDR spoofs, which are worth watching if you would like a laugh. And I know over the past couple of days of some news and things we've got going on in the United States right now, I could use a laugh or two. But as always, your support means a lot and keeps the motorcycle world running for everybody. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel and visit adventuremotorcycle.com for more news, reviews, videos, podcasts, merch, and more. Until next time, from everyone here at ADVMoto, ride safe and have fun.